Welcome to the M.O.W channel. Today we are talking about an American serial murder case from 2003 involving a man convicted of killing 7 women, known as Sick Ripper. How did he end up receiving a total sentence of 360 years in prison? Please hit the subscribe button. Let's begin today's case file. William Devin Howell was born on February 11, 1970, and began drifting like a ghost through the quiet nights of Connecticut, wearing the face of an ordinary neighbor. Inside him, however, lived a twisted desire that found pleasure in destroying human life. In the beginning, no one imagined that this seemingly normal man would become one of the most brutal serial killers in modern crime history. The tragedy began before the fireworks of the new year had even faded in 2003. Melanie Ruth Camilleri, a 29-year-old mother, vanished into the cold air of Waterbury. She had 2 children, but her life had become unstable due to severe drug addiction, because she often disappeared for days at a time. Her lifestyle, ironically, created the perfect opportunity for Howell. He deliberately chose women who had fallen outside society's safety net. Howell used his blue 1987 Ford Econoline van as both a weapon and a hiding place. It would later earn the horrifying nickname Mobile Graveyard. He remodeled the inside so he could confine victims, kill them, and store the bodies until he disposed of them. During the first half of 2003, Howell drove across Connecticut looking for victims to lure into his van. He mainly targeted women suffering from drug addiction, women involved in sex work, or runaways who might disappear without triggering an immediate investigation. Around May 2003, 55-year-old Diane Cusack became one of his targets. She lived in New Britain and struggled with mental health and substance issues. She had long been estranged from her family. Howell sensed her isolation and vulnerability and took her life. On June 18, 2003, Howell's violence turned toward another victim, 44-year-old Janice Roberts. She was a transgender woman struggling to survive while facing constant prejudice. The last time she was seen alive, she was getting into Howell's blue van near the Stop and Shop in Wethersfield. Howell later claimed that when he realized she was transgender, he lost his temper and killed her. His statement revealed more than murder. It exposed his hatred and need for domination. A missing persons report was filed for her on June 24, but police assumed she had simply run away, losing a crucial chance early in the investigation. During this time, Howell had created his own execution ground. He discovered a dense wooded area behind a shopping plaza on Hartford Road in New Britain. The spot was swampy, inaccessible by car, and rarely visited. He called it his garden and began burying women there, one by one. He described the act as if he were planting something and felt not guilt, but a bizarre sense of accomplishment. As the summer of 2003 went on, he grew bolder. He lived out of his van with some of the victims and kept their belongings as trophies. The town felt vague anxiety as more people disappeared, but police treated every case as unrelated and never seriously considered the possibility of a serial killer. Howell continued to drive the roads as if mocking the gaps in the investigation. By day he looked like an ordinary worker. By night he became a hunter. The families of Melanie, Diane, and Janice waited every night for their loved ones to return. But in Howell's garden, only silence remained. The beginning of this story is not simply a list of missing persons. It is a record of how one man slipped into the blind spots of society and built his own dark kingdom. He drove his blue van back into the night, searching for the next victim. As the tragedy in Connecticut moved toward its next chapter, he was said to be gentle and friendly when luring victims. He offered cigarettes, drugs, or money to lower their guard. Once the van door closed, his true nature emerged. The van was soundproofed, so the screams never reached the outside world. In that sealed space, he held absolute power. By July 2003, his hunting became more frequent, and the graves in the woods he called his garden continued to fill. The only traces of the missing women remained in the blood-soaked floor of his van and the soil deep in the forest, while the rest of the world went on with everyday life. This was the beginning of William Devin Howell's horrific series of murders, the birth of a great evil that almost no one realized was unfolding. As the second half of 2003 began, the number of missing persons cases in Connecticut reached a level that could no longer be seen as isolated incidents. On July 31, 2003, the family of 33-year-old Nelsa Arizmendi went to the police to report that she had been missing for a week, and the investigation entered a new phase. At first, detectives focused on the boyfriend she had been living with and questioned him aggressively. Because of his past drug-dealing charges, he seemed suspicious, but a polygraph test showed he was telling the truth on every question. Insisting on his innocence, he gave police a crucial lead. He said that around 2:30 a.m., on the night Nelsa disappeared, he saw her getting into a blue van, driven by a man named William Devin Howell outside a motel in Wethersfield. This was the first real thread pulling investigators toward the truth. Hidden in the fog, police immediately began tracking Howell, but he had already left Connecticut, moving from state to state to avoid being caught. He used fake names and took short-term jobs, constantly changing locations. After months of persistence, investigators finally located the 1987 Ford van used in his crimes in April 2004 in North Carolina and seized it. The van looked cleaned and the back seat cushions had been removed to erase any trace of crime. But modern forensic science went further than Howell's efforts. Investigators ripped up the carpets and found 2 tiny bloodstains on the metal floor that were invisible to the naked eye. The DNA results were shocking. One of the blood samples matched the genetic profile of missing Nilsa Arizmendi. With 99% certainty, this proved the van was not simply a vehicle, but a crime scene where violence had taken place. Even more disturbing was the discovery of 6 videotapes inside the van. Howell had recorded himself committing sadistic acts and bizarre sexual abuse against his victims. Their faces were deliberately covered, but the fear and pain they suffered came through clearly. From the videos, investigators realized Howell was not only a killer. He wanted control, domination, and the pleasure of recording what he did. Even as the investigation moved forward, the number of victims kept rising. In October 2003, 26-year-old Marilyn Gonzalez from Waterbury left home and vanished. On October 10, 23rd-year-old Joyvelyn Martinez also disappeared. She had once been a promising high school track athlete. When she failed to show up to her own birthday party, her mother knew something was terribly wrong. At the end of October, 40-year-old Mary Jane Menard disappeared in New Britain. She had overcome addiction and was working as a substance abuse counselor, helping others rebuild their lives. But she too fell victim to Howell's brutality. Investigators noticed that these disappearances aligned closely with places where Howell's van had been seen. During this period, Howell used his van like a mobile graveyard. He sometimes drove around for days with bodies in the back instead of disposing of them immediately. At times, he wore his victims' belongings or displayed their items inside the van like trophies. To avoid police stops, he mostly traveled at night, and he even damaged the fingertips of victims to hide their identities. Detectives learned that Howell frequently returned to a certain area of New Britain and began planning a detailed search there. Howell's run finally came to an end in May 2005, when he was arrested in Hampton, Virginia. At the time, he was living as an ordinary day laborer and did not seem surprised by police. He firmly denied all charges. He claimed the blood in the van came from a fight between Arizmendi and her boyfriend, using lies to create confusion. Even after being jailed, he tried to recruit other inmates to intimidate witnesses and interfere with evidence. The investigation at this stage became a psychological battle between Howell's manipulative defenses and the detectives' determination to gather solid scientific proof. Police first charged Howell with first-degree manslaughter. In the case of Nilsa Arizmendi, without a body, proving murder in court is extremely difficult. Investigators questioned him repeatedly, but he either stayed silent or rambled to stall for time, believing he might brag to fellow inmates. Detectives used confidential informants to coax information from him. Soon, chilling statements surfaced. Howell referred to himself as Sick Ripper and called his victims babies. By the end of this phase of the investigation, police were closing in on the location he called his garden, and the atmosphere in the command center felt like the calm before a storm as Connecticut prepared for one of the most horrific excavation operations in its history. In May 2005, after being arrested in Hampton, Virginia, William Devin Howell proved far more cunning and cold than investigators had expected. Even when confronted with clear physical evidence, including blood belonging to Nilsa Arizmendi found inside his van, he did not waver. Each time detectives pressed him about the bloodstain results, he repeated the same story. He claimed Nilsa and her boyfriend had gotten into a violent fight in his van, causing nosebleeds or minor wounds that left blood behind. He understood perfectly that without a body and with a defendant firmly denying guilt, it would be difficult for prosecutors to prove murder. Police were convinced Howell was behind the disappearance of 7 women, yet they had no proof of how the killings were carried out or where the bodies had been left. The investigation slammed into a wall. Even in jail, Howell did not stop trying to manipulate the investigation. He recruited fellow inmates and plotted to threaten Nilsa Arizmendi's boyfriend and frame him for the crime. Because of this, Howell was hit with additional charges for trying to tamper with a witness, but he still refused to admit to murder. Investigators began to fear that without a confession, the full truth would never be revealed. After months of legal back and forth, prosecutors made a strategic decision. They worried that if they pushed ahead with a murder charge without a body and lost, Howell could walk free forever. So in January 2007, they charged him with first-degree manslaughter instead. At that point, Howell submitted what is known as an offered plea. Under an offered plea, a defendant does not formally admit guilt, but acknowledges that the prosecution has enough evidence to likely convince a jury and agrees to accept punishment. Howell used the plea to maintain the appearance of innocence, while still securing a lighter sentence than a murder conviction would bring. On the day of sentencing, however, he suddenly changed his attitude. He claimed his public defender had forced him into the plea and demanded that it be withdrawn, creating turmoil in the courtroom. He mocked the legal system to the very end and inflicted fresh pain on the victims' families. The court rejected his request and sentenced him to 15 years in prison for first-degree manslaughter. Compared with the loss of 7 lives, it felt unbearably light. Once Howell was transferred to prison, it seemed the case might fade into silence forever. But the real crisis began inside the prison walls. Howell started bragging about his crimes while playing cards or relaxing with other inmates. He called himself Sick Ripper and said an uncontrollable, hungry monster lived inside him. He talked in detail about the hardships of disposing of bodies during the winter of 2003. Because the ground was frozen solid, he could not dig, so he left the body of one woman in the back of his van for 2 weeks. He slept next to the corpse, ate his meals there, and chillingly referred to the victims as his babies. These confessions were not simply boasting. Howell described how he mutilated bodies to hide their identities, cutting off finger joints and removing lower jaws before dumping them in different locations. Investigators obtained these statements through confidential informants, but they still could not pinpoint where the garden he mentioned actually was. Howell dropped only vague hints about an area near a shopping plaza in New Britain, taunting detectives. If they failed to find the remains, Howell could walk out of prison after only 15 years. Families of the victims lived in fear that he might be released and start hunting again. Inside the investigation team, tensions grew. Excavating possible burial sites would require enormous funding and manpower, yet the chances of finding remains in such wide areas of woods and marshland were painfully low. Several searches came up empty, public interest faded, and Howell seemed content, sitting in prison, reliving his crimes in his mind. It was the darkest moment, when justice looked as if it might never be served. Howell's silence and legal maneuvers appeared to be working, and the truth seemed destined to stay buried beneath the cold earth of 2003. But then, an unexpected event began to open the gate to that garden, and cracks finally started to appear in the silence. When Howell sat behind the prison walls, bragging about his crimes as if they were heroic tales, mocking the justice system, the wheels of justice started turning from an unexpected place. One day in 2007, a man scouting for a hunting spot near Hartford Road in New Britain discovered a strange shape sticking out from the brush. It was human remains, bleached into a skeleton after years of exposure. Police immediately sealed off the area and began excavation. The place turned out to be the exact spot Howell proudly referred to as his garden, in a swampy area thick with trees that search teams had previously struggled to reach. The remains of Diane Cusack, Joy Valin Martinez, and Mary Jane Menard were recovered one after another. Buried in the soil, they stood as horrifying proof that the stories Howell had told fellow inmates were not empty boasts. But this was only the beginning. The whereabouts of the remaining victims Howell claimed to have buried were still unknown. By 2015, investigators expanded the search area and launched a large-scale re-examination using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. For days, detectives slogged through mud and sifted through every handful of dirt. Finally, on April 28, 2015, more remains were unearthed from the wet ground. The bones of Nilsa Arizmendi, Marilyn Gonzalez, and Melanie Ruth Camilini were brought back into the light. After more than a decade trapped in the cold earth, their spirits were finally found. The scene was overwhelming. The remains matched Howell's descriptions, showing severe mutilation and chilling marks left to make identification harder. Once the bodies were discovered, Howell's bravado collapsed. Realizing he could no longer deny anything, he began describing his methods in detail. He recounted the horrifying hours he spent in his van after killing his victims. He said he treated the dead women like living dolls, brushing their hair and talking to them. He even admitted that when he buried them in his garden, he arranged them at specific intervals, revealing an obsession driven by madness. His confession was so graphic that even seasoned investigators felt sick. Howell viewed his killings as if they were a twisted work of art or a farming project, showing not a shred of remorse for his victims' suffering. Forensic results confirmed his brutality. Some bones showed marks from cutting tools, proving he had mutilated the victims, not just to dispose of the bodies, but to cover up his crimes. DNA from old bloodstains taken from the floor of his van matched the remains exactly. With that, every missing piece from the string of disappearances that terrorized Connecticut in 2003 finally fell into place. Howell was no longer just a man convicted of manslaughter. He now stood in court as a serial killer responsible for 7 murders. During this pivotal moment, The courtroom was filled with the family's anger and grief. After more than 10 years of not knowing whether their daughters and sisters were alive, all they received back were shattered bones and Howell's shameless confessions. Throughout the trial, Howell sometimes acted indifferent and other times pretended to be misunderstood. But in the face of overwhelming evidence and the undeniable testimony of the victims' remains, he was powerless. Prosecutors emphasized the danger he posed to society and prepared to seek the maximum sentence possible. The 7 bodies found in the so-called Garden of Death became the hammer that shattered the empire of evil Howell had built. Public attention then turned to what final judgment Howell would receive. Already serving a 15-year sentence, the additional murder charges were enough to ensure he would remain in darkness forever. Howell even complained that he deserved the death penalty. But it was nothing more than another calculated attempt to manipulate the system. The longest and most harrowing investigation in Connecticut's history had finally reached its end, and the truth behind the mobile graveyard, created by one man's twisted desire, shocked the world. Howell's garden was no longer a secret place. The truth uncovered there declared that he would never again walk among society as a free human being. On November 17, 2017, the courtroom in Connecticut was packed with people who had gathered to witness the final judgment for William Devin Howell. Already serving time for the earlier case involving Nelsa Arizmendi, Howell stood before the court and admitted to the murders of 6 more victims, submitting himself to the full weight of the law. As the hearing began, he showed a very different attitude from the cold, defiant man he once appeared to be. He faced the families of the victims and cried, saying his actions were monstrous, cowardly, and deeply selfish. He even told the judge that someone like him deserved the death penalty, trying to present himself as remorseful. But to the families, his tears meant nothing. The 7 lives he had taken and the 14 years of pain and uncertainty could never be erased. Despite Howell's confession and apparent remorse, the court showed no leniency, taking into account the brutality of his crimes and the impact they had on society. Connecticut had abolished the death penalty in 2012, and the state Supreme Court finalized that decision in 2015. So the punishment Howell claimed to deserve was not legally possible. Instead, the judge sentenced him to 60 years in prison for each of the 6 murder charges. The total amounted to 360 years, and when combined with his existing sentence, his chances of ever walking out of prison were essentially zero. In the sentencing remarks, the judge condemned Howell for treating his victims like objects, trampling their dignity, and burying them in what he called a garden, calling it one of the worst crimes imaginable. Immediately after sentencing, Howell was transferred to the Cheshire Correctional Institution, where he began serving his time under strict supervision. He now spends most of his days alone in a small cell, paying the price for what he did. The predator who once drove his mobile graveyard through Connecticut's roads in terror now has nothing to look at but a narrow slice of sky beyond the bars. According to prison officials, Howell eventually abandoned the swagger he once had and became noticeably withdrawn. Still, the public does not believe his remorse is real. Many see his courtroom tears as a calculated attempt to gain sympathy or secure better treatment. Now that the death penalty is no longer an option. At the same time Howell was taken into custody, the wooded area in New Britain that he had once called his garden underwent a major cleanup. The place where the bodies had been left for so long was transformed into a small memorial site for the victims. Families now visit on the anniversaries of disappearances and birthdays, leaving flowers and honoring their loved ones. The case also led to major changes in Connecticut law enforcement. Realizing the critical importance of early response in missing persons cases, police overhauled their procedures and strengthened protection systems for vulnerable women and marginalized groups. The scars left by Howell were deep, but the effort to heal them pushed society toward becoming a safer place. For the families, Howell's life sentence felt like finally emerging from a long, dark tunnel. Mothers and children who had lived for more than a decade, not knowing whether their loved ones were alive, could at last let them rest. The names Melanie, Janice, Diane, Nelsa, and the others were no longer remembered only as victims of a serial killer, but as people who were loved. Meanwhile, the name William Devin Howell remains recorded in history as a symbol of evil. He will fade away behind prison walls, buried under a 360-year sentence, and the weight of his crimes will follow him until the day he dies. In the end, this case leaves us with powerful lessons about the ordinary face of evil and the relentless pursuit of justice. Howell hid among us behind the mask of a neighbor, yet science, persistence, and an unexpected tip finally tore that mask away. The mobile graveyard has stopped, the cries from the so-called garden have faded, but the people left behind still refuse to forget. His 360-year sentence is more than a number. It is the strongest warning society can send to those who disregard human life, and the least measure of respect that can be shown to the victims. As Howell watches his life slowly vanish within cold concrete walls, he will come to understand what true hell means. That is where we will end today's story. After looking into so many cases, one question always remains: what truths are criminals still hiding? The truth about serial killers remains a mystery. We will be back tomorrow with another case and another mystery. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Thank you for watching.